Catherine Winch did not want to go to dinner with her husband's tennis partner, Kat.
I was really dreading it. And I thought, gosh, if I could just be as good as Kat, and like, are we going to have anything in common? And is it going to be awkward? And I didn't want to be jealous of somebody that I didn't even know, but I was feeling it, in my bones that maybe we wouldn't have that much in common. Fast forward, many years later, we became very, very good friends. She's an absolute riot. We had so much in common. We hit it off immediately, became, fast friends. But several years later, she told me that on the way to dinner that night, she was so intimidated because I was working outside of the home and she was a stay-at-home mom. And what would we have in common? And what would I think of her? And what in the world would we talk about? And so it turns out, we both love tequila, we both love music, like we had so many things in common. But as we're both driving across town to meet up for the first time, we were both convinced that it was not going to be a good time. And nothing could have been further from the truth, because within 10 minutes of meeting each other, we fell in love.
This is the How She Moms podcast with Whitney Archibald. I'm a mother of 5 on a mission to help moms connect with your kids, manage your homes, and create your own unique version of motherhood. I curate ideas from different moms so you can pick and choose what works for you and your family. Catherine Winch from the intro is one of the last women I would expect to be intimidated by another woman. She gave a TED Talk, for heaven's sakes. She's the CEO of her own company, The Mom Complex, and she wrote a fantastic book about slaying our dragons of self-doubt called Slay Like a Mother. But it happens to so many of us.
I know from my research that 9 out of 10 women struggle with self-doubt. And I think if you can have women in your life that are comfortable talking about their challenges, talking about their self-doubt, talking about their struggles, it can be a huge relief, because we do face different challenges than men. We do have different lived experiences than men. And so I think the greatest thing that comes from female companionship is knowing that we're not alone in the struggles that we face. And I think what gets in the way is being intimidated, like I was saying with Kat, being intimidated that someone is successful and you're not, or someone's thin and you're not, or somebody has 5 children. Like I could be very intimidated that, you have 5, I only have 2, and I think that gets in the way where we certainly have a ton in common. And I think maybe we look at our differences and we get intimidated.
Today's episode, How She Makes Friends, is the first of 3 episodes about friendship. We'll cover 12 tips for getting out of our comfort zones and meeting new people. Then the next 2 episodes will be about how to gather friends, with lots of ideas for starting groups and throwing parties, and then another episode about how to cultivate friendships and develop deep connections. These 3 episodes are part of a larger series about building community and supporting other women. It started with episode 93, How She Dismantles the Mommy Wars, then episode 94, How She Supports Other Moms, and episode 97, How Devin and Alexis Support Each Other and Other Moms. The reason I'm devoting so much time to this topic is that in every survey I've done to find out what other moms struggle with, friendship is always in the top 5. We struggle to put ourselves out there and make friends, to make time to cultivate friendships, and to establish deep connections. Often we assume that everyone else has all the friends they need and we're the only ones feeling lonely. But the sheer number of people who feel that way proves that it's not true. We need each other, we need connection, and we need help. One of the biggest obstacles to friendship as a mom in any stage is just making time for it. So as I was researching for this episode, I wanted to know if anyone had actually studied about how much time it actually takes to make friends. The answer is, of course they have, because there are studies about pretty much anything. I came across a great article in the Journal of Social and Personal Relations called, appropriately, How Many Hours Does It Take to Make a Friend by Jeffrey A. Hall. One interesting thing about this article is that it suggests that 3 main things contribute to making friends: hours together, shared activities, and conversation, which feels pretty accurate to me, especially when I looked at the 12 tips I had already gathered to organize this episode. So let's start by talking about time. The first tip is to make friendship a priority.
It's all about time. That is the key. And it takes so much time to feel that connection. And so it's impossible to really do unless you set up some intentional thing.
That was Jenica Woodbury, who's an expert at prioritizing friendship. You'll hear more from her in this episode, but even more in the next episode, because her true expertise is in gathering people and organizing social groups. So, how much time are we talking? Back to that journal article, How Many Hours Does It Take to Make a Friend? The article refers to several different studies. One suggests that it takes 60 hours. Another suggests that you can become casual friends after 6 to 8 hours of casual interaction. Of course, all of this depends on your definition of friend. I'm very liberal about who I call a friend. Like everyone I've ever interviewed for this podcast, people I go to church with, etc. Plus, my pantry door is still completely covered with Christmas cards from people I love and consider my friends. Have I spent 60 hours with all these people? No, but I've spent much more than that with several of them. So there are obviously different levels of friends, and time together doesn't always equal friendship if you just don't click. Hill's article described 4 levels of friendship, from acquaintances to casual friends to friends and then to good friends. I would probably add one more, best friends level, with a handful or even one person in it. Regardless of exactly how much time it takes to make friends at each level, we obviously have to prioritize and make time for friendship if we want it. And if you don't make it a priority, you're going to have to make time for loneliness anyway. All that moping and pining, so you might as well dedicate that time for friendship instead. The problem is that motherhood, running a household, and other work also requires a lot of time. But that's why it's called prioritizing. You have to figure out what's important and make time for it. Here's Christina Acosta, founder of a community of women called Growing Up Gorgeous.
The biggest barrier that I see for vulnerability and connection in moms is we are so busy and we are always pouring out. And so what ends up happening is we're like, we'll get to that. You know, it goes on the eventually kind of list. I always say sisterhood is self-care, right? But when we hear that word self-care, that comes with its own okay, I'm trying, our own guilt that we may carry. And so I think it's just acknowledging that, acknowledging it's really important to keep sisterhood as a priority and then chasing after it, not allowing yourself to get defeated. If you say you're going to show up for this weekly play group, keep going, keep going and keep showing up. And that know that you and your relationships are important enough to put that as a top priority. Even with lunches that need to be prepared and homework and all the things that need to be done, your wellness is tied to having a supportive community that can love on you and that you can support. And I think as moms, we have to give ourselves permission to go ahead and focus on that and let that be part of our self-care plan and know that I'm worth really investing in my relationships and I'm worth putting this as a priority and pushing past the uncomfortableness and the awkwardness.
That is so true. Friendship is a huge component of self-care. And if you decide friendship is a priority, you can be creative about how to make time for it. Especially when you're a mom, this requires deliberate action. Elise Caffey is very good at prioritizing friendship. In fact, she runs an Instagram account all about friendship, at The Friendship Experiment. You know how much I love experiments. She says,
you need to take an active role in friendship. If you are a mom that is sitting home and you have young kids or big kids and you feel like you don't have the friends that you want, you're responsible to do something about it. Nobody else is responsible to do something about it. And I think when you feel empowered to do something about it, then you can do some of the things like developing social skills or putting yourself in situations, finding new situations to make friends. But I think when we sit and wallow in the fact that we're not finding the kind of friends, we look on social media and we scroll and we see, oh, those girls went on a girls trip. Oh, that person looks like they have a lot of friends. I don't have that same group. When we sit and wallow in that, that doesn't help us. It just makes us feel bad about ourselves. And it means we're not taking any action ourselves. So if you feel that feeling when you're scrolling through, it's a good reminder, do something about it. Take some sort of small action.
I know, that can be easier said than done. But you've taken one active step because you're listening to a podcast about friendship right now. Not every tip in this episode will work for you, but hopefully you'll find at least one way to take a small action after listening. One of my favorite ways to make time for friends is to include them in the things I'm doing anyway, like working, exercising, or taking kids on outings. In the next episode, we'll talk more in depth about specific ideas for activities you can do with friends that can fit into a full schedule. So prioritizing friendship is all well and good, but where do we find these friends? It's not like people are throwing themselves at you to try and be your best friend, unless Taylor Swift or Kristen Bell is listening. And don't worry, we will talk about how to find friends. But first, we're going to talk about general categories of friends to look for. The second tip for today is to evaluate your friendship needs. I know it feels a little crass to look at friendship as a way to fulfill our needs because it obviously has to go both ways. You don't want to cross the line into using or manipulating people, but loneliness is real and we really do need other people in our lives. Sometimes we're looking for that one Swiss Army knife of friends who can fulfill all our friendship needs. And some of us have found that one best friend who really does fill multiple roles. But I prefer to think of friendship more like a bouquet, where different friends fill different needs. Some are pops of color that just dazzle you. Others provide texture and greenery, and others are there to complement the rest of the bouquet. I asked Elise Caffey about the role of different friends.
I for sure think you have different needs at different times in life and then also throughout your life. So you may have that group of people who have known you forever, and they're the people that you can bare your soul to. And you know that even if you don't keep up that day-to-day interaction, when you talk to them, they know your history. You'll talk to them for 2 hours and you can both fill each other's cup that way. I think there's those kinds of friends, and those kinds of friends, because you've built up such a history, you can kind of go like on and off like that. I have friends like that from college, roommates from college, or one of my really close high school friends that you can go a long time, but when you are together, you connect like it was yesterday that you last saw them. I know I am not that fun of a person. So I love those friends that are fun. I had this group of friends that we call ourselves the adventure group. And for each other's birthdays, we go do really fun things that like I would never do on my own. And I need those friends because they push me outside my comfort zone and they make me try new things. They're really entertaining and fun, and a lot of just that kind of levity that they bring to your life. I think that's awesome. I think you also have friends that maybe you don't touch base with every day, but like the friends that really step up when you need someone. So let's say your family's going through a hard time or you're going through a hard time, and they may not be your best day-to-day friends, but they're those kind of friends that just jump in when they see a need. And sometimes those people aren't really that close to you, but they are just kind of the helper friends, the service-oriented friends.
I'll add to those categories. We often think about finding friends who have similar talents, personalities, and interests to our own. But often you need a complementary friend. Not complementary with an I, although that's nice too, but complementary with an E, a friend who fills your gaps and is strong where you're weak. One type of friend that comes to mind for me is that I've always somehow had at least one friend who's good at clothes shopping and who enjoys it, since that's not a skill I have. I'm looking at you, Emma and Molly. And maybe if you're an introvert, an extroverted friend could really come in handy and vice versa. But it's not like we're putting out personal ads for specific types of friends, like girl with 10-year-old wardrobe seeks stylish personal shopper. But when we meet people or think about our friends in the acquaintance category, we can recognize, wow, she's really fun. I need more of that in my life. Or, she's very stylish. Maybe she wouldn't mind helping me update my wardrobe. Or, I really need a workout buddy. I'm going to send a group text and see if anyone wants to go running once a week. Christina had a great word for another type of friend that I would never have thought of.
Sandpaper souls. It's basically like there's certain personalities that like, it's like sandpaper. Like we just don't get along. I don't know what it is. Like, but I want to be one of your people because we're in the same space or we work together or whatever it is. And I think it's important to know, where are you when you're approaching your sandpaper friend? Like, because if we're both in a bad place, it's not gonna go well. That's when conflicts. And like, if I'm in a really hard place, maybe we don't need to meet up right now because I'm not in a good space. And I know that there's certain friends that I have that are really good for helping me when I'm on 10, that are really good for having those hard conversations. Yeah. And then there's some other friends, that's not what our friendship is based on. And that's okay. My mama used to say this. You have 2 or 3 really, really good friends that are there for you in those hard moments. Cherish those, but you can't expect that from everybody, that you have interactions with.
I love this acknowledgement that you can still consider someone your friend, even if you need to interact in small doses. And then there are those friends who you know will be completely honest with you, from food between your teeth to flagging a poor decision or telling you it's time to retire those jeans. I've definitely had different friendship needs in different times of my life. Friendship changes when we become moms, and then it keeps changing through different stages of motherhood. For example, when I had young kids and mostly interacted with babies and toddlers, I desperately needed friends that I could talk to about ideas and have adult conversations with. So a friend and I started a book club, and that was exactly what I needed. Now that my kids are all in school and I get to interview so many fascinating people for this podcast, I get to talk about ideas all day long. I still need friends. They just don't have to be down for philosophical conversations all the time. Christina Acosta also talked about how her friendship needs changed after becoming a mother.
It was something about the isolation of like being in the house, breastfeeding my first child, and not really being able to go out and about and do my thing that really helped me to realize like the loneliness of motherhood is real. I actually could kind of feel it in my heart and needing company and friendship. And I think that I did find that a lot of my friends who didn't have babies yet, they were so supportive, but they didn't necessarily understand that motherhood comes with its own weight and its own responsibilities, and you can get pulled every other way. And I wasn't as available, and I needed some moms who understood that and can kind of walk us alongside me of it. And you know what? I always think about the story of when my oldest daughter, the first time she got sick, and really needing to have somebody to call to say like, oh my goodness, this little tiny baby has a fever. I'm really nervous. I'm really worried. And just needing to have someone there to be like, it's okay. And this is what you're going to do. And thankfully I have sisters. So my sisters kind of served that spot for me. But I recognized early on that everybody doesn't have that. And everybody doesn't have really supportive friends who'll come and visit. And it really got my mind thinking slowly that, wait, there's something about community and there's something about a village that really makes a difference.
As your kids get older and start to go to school, the specific loneliness of early motherhood may subside a little, but the next stage can be lonely for different reasons. Here's Elise Caffey, who has 3 girls in elementary school.
In this stage of motherhood, you are running your kids all over the place, or you have just literal jobs that you need to be doing all day long, or even stay-at-home moms. You're just trying to do so many jobs and responsibilities and errands and that kind of thing, that the busyness of that life, and then also supporting, in my case, 4 other people and all the things they're trying to do, sometimes you don't have the bandwidth to navigate friendship as well. So I think a lot of times people just get really busy. So I think friendship is different in that stage because you almost have to really look for opportunities to hang out with friends and make opportunities. Otherwise, you can be really busy, but also kind of lonely.
As kids continue to grow, they become more self-sufficient in their own social lives, and we no longer have the excuse of play dates or park time to meet other moms through them. To talk about this stage, here's Mary Van Geffen, a parenting coach whom you may remember from one of my most popular episodes ever, episode 101, How Mary Parents Spicy Ones, and whom you can find on Instagram at Mary Van Geffen.
Yeah, middle school, suddenly you're just dropping the kid off and you haven't met a single soul. And then when they do have hangs, they don't call them play dates anymore, people are just dropping their kid off at your house and they don't even want to meet you. I mean, it's an odd, like jarring transition for sure. And so finding friends is less about the schooling and more about, I think it begins to be, what are your interests? Okay,
Yeah.
like, do you want to take up tennis and meet a few people in your tennis class? Or do
It's
you
almost
want
like
to join a
dating.
hiking club? It is like dating. And I think we have to normalize, like straight up naming it and asking for what we want. Like, I'm enjoying spending time with you. I'd love to spend more time with you. Would you want to get some coffee sometime? And it's taking a risk. Most people are going to say, yeah, sure, or this was fun.
Again, you have to kind of relearn what it means to make friends. As many of these women have said, it's so helpful to have friends in your same stage to walk beside you, swap stories, commiserate, and share ideas. But it's also really helpful to have friends who walk ahead of you and who walk behind you.
Having mom friends to talk to, but then also like having friends from different walks of life, you know, like, so you want to have like mom friends who have kids that are the same age, and maybe mom friends who have kids that are older so they can tell you like, you're going to get through this. It's okay. You know, this stage is hard. And then have mom friends that are younger than you that you can kind of mentor also. Like, it's good to learn from everybody at different stages. and to be there for people who are either, ahead of you or, past you.
That was one of my personal friends, Diana Visser. She's an elementary teacher and mom of 2. I love this advice to diversify and include friends of all ages and stages in your bouquet. Then you can keep that in mind as we talk about where and how to find new friends. So now that you've kind of assessed what kind of friends you're looking for, where do you go about finding these friends? The third tip is short but sweet. Elise had a great insight.
When I'm feeling like my friendships need a change, which people are reaching out to me? Because sometimes I feel like I have a lot of one-sided friendships. And I think when I asked people on my Instagram, a lot of people feel like they're doing all the work in their friendships. And it's interesting. Well, everybody can't be doing all the work in their friendships. So it may be that certain friendships you're doing more work. But I think it's good to stop sometimes and think like, sometimes you discount the people that are reaching out to you and are doing nice things for you because you're looking to make friends with these people over here or this group or do something different. I think it's good to assess who is trying to make time for me, who is already being a good friend, because sometimes there are people we don't recognize, and that may be worth putting more time into.
So before you go out trying to find new friends, look around and see who is already making an effort. Give them a chance. The fourth tip is to meet people in places you already go on a regular basis. Maybe that's church or your kid's school. Maybe it's work or the gym or the park in your neighborhood. It may seem like a somewhat passive way to meet friends, but I've made some of my best friends by just looking around me and getting to know people that I already see anyway, at preschool or kindergarten drop-off, soccer sidelines, the climbing gym, or the park. And be careful about your first impressions. I can't tell you how many times I've become friends with people I was hesitant about at first. Some of them have even become my closest friends. Part of the reason this tip works is the whole time thing. If you meet people in places that are part of your mutual routines, you're guaranteed to spend time with them at least somewhat regularly, and that adds up. Here's Elise.
Based on the research that I've done, a lot of times people become friends because of proximity. Mm-hmm. And that's the majority of the friends that you have, unless they're family, because people are generally lazy. I mean, you don't want to say that, but it's kind of true. And so in different stages of your lives, you have certain friends. And especially you think about when you were growing up in school, the friends that you're friends with were like the kids in your neighborhood, the kids in your class. If someone wasn't in your class, you're devastated because the implications of that is just by not being in their class, you might not be as good of friends. And I think that same kind of thing happens as adults. It's your friends who have kids the same stages of life, you're drawn towards, or if your kids are all on a soccer team and you make friends on that soccer team, when you're no longer on that soccer team, the friends disappear. Like, it's just interesting to see. So I think you often will have situational friends like related to proximity, but then you also maybe have certain groups that you're part of. A lot of people make friends through work. That's one of the main places people, like in the US, make friends. Some people make friends at bars. It just depends on where you tend to spend the most time. So just going to the gym necessarily doesn't mean you're going to be friends, but you run into each other more. That person's on your mind, their mind. So then when they're having a party or they're planning something, they think, oh, they remember you. And so some of the proximity leads to other friendship experiences. I know I had some friends move into our neighborhood just in the last few years, and they were struggling making friends. And I was trying to think like, well, where are my friends? And it's like church and the gym. And then some of these social circles that I've now created outside of those things. And so a couple of the girls, we would just encourage, like, come to the gym because we're there every day and everyone's there for an hour. Everybody then goes about the rest of their day and nobody's seeing friends, but people were feeling left out because they weren't connected to these friends. And I was like, it's because we're all going to the gym. I would be left out too if I didn't go to the gym. But it was that place where with the proximity, people would remember about you, and you'd have that hour in the day, and you weren't even there talking it for an hour, but like the 10 minutes before class to just touch base really quick. And a lot of times with friendships, it's those little attempts to kind of connect that build the relationship over time.
Jenica Woodbury has a really sweet example of this, getting to know her neighbor Cheryl, someone she probably wouldn't have met if not for the proximity of their houses. Jenica has since moved, but they still keep in touch, and Jenica recently visited her.
She was this friendship I never would have expected. She was going through and still going through this terribly ugly divorce, and she just I don't know that I would have ever met her. It was just this random opportunity that I took someone up on. I had a next door neighbor that said, hey, we don't have a trampoline. You guys don't have a trampoline. But if you want to jump on a trampoline, Cheryl, she lives 3 doors down. She has a tramp and no kids to use it. And she loves to have people come and use her tramp. So just know, if you ever want to go over there, she's a good person. And so I knocked on her door and I said, we just moved here. Can my kids jump on your trampoline? She's like, yes, as long as you stay, that's great with me. So I had a chance to meet her there. And she just got down on my kids' eye level and she asked about my children, and she was very warm. And from there, we just have this neat friendship. And of all the friends that I made in that neighborhood, I had to go see Cheryl.
I love both sides of that story. Cheryl for opening her trampoline to her neighbors and Jenica for taking her up on it. Both sides can be vulnerable. If you don't feel like you have friendship opportunities in your normal routine, maybe it's time to make some of those opportunities happen by just hanging out where other moms are hanging out. When Christina Acosta became a mom, she realized that
where you go and how you hang out becomes really different, right? Like you may end up doing brunch and that sort of thing before you're a mother and like just enjoying having your own free time. And all of a sudden you find yourself at the park and at play dates and Chuck E. Cheese and all that kind of thing. So the actual kind of opportunities for you to really make real connections, they can kind of slim down, right? To like moms group in really specific places.
So where should you go to meet these other moms? When your kids are younger, maybe it's the park or library story time, maybe it's church or community play groups. And most communities have Mommy and Me classes or MOPS groups, which stands for Mothers of Preschoolers. Joining existing groups in the community was a good solution for Julie Vick, who sometimes finds it hard to reach out to other moms because she's an introvert.
When my kids were little, and I was trying to like navigate a lot of the new parenthood stuff, I did make a little bit more of an effort to join some sort of like local mom or parenting groups, that where I could meet other people that were in the same situation or scenario. So I did have to push myself a little bit. So like when my first son was born, he's like little, I started going to like a breastfeeding group, and I was like trying to figure out how to breastfeed. And so it was helpful. And then it like got me out of the house. It got me like with other people in the same scenario. And it was just like helping me with like what could be a parenting challenge. So, but I remember it being really hard to get out of the house sometimes because you just like were tired and you're, trying to manage it between naps and, all these things.
Julie actually ended up writing a guidebook for other introverted moms called Babies Don't Make Small Talk, So Why Should I? I loved it, even though I'm not particularly introverted myself. Another group that's available pretty much anywhere is the PTO or PTA. Both Jenica and Elise were hesitant about joining the PTA at first, but ended up enjoying it and making great friends there.
Every school is going to have some kind of parent organization, and that has been a very meaningful way for me to find really great friends. So support that, even if it's just showing up to one meeting and getting a feel for it. I kind of thought PTA was really fluffy and pointless. I felt like, that's not going to be my thing. But I showed up to one meeting and I thought, no, I could help with this one thing. And it grew into such a fulfilling thing. And I just did what I wanted to do and didn't feel like I had to do all this stuff that I thought wasn't maybe the best use of time. That's happening. They need your support. It's a great way to make friends.
And if it's tricky for you to join an in-person group for whatever reason, there are many options for online groups these days. Julie Vick has made some great friends through online writing groups. If you can't find a group you want to join or that fits your schedule, maybe it's time to start your own.
I vividly remember visiting multiple moms groups, and the conversations that were happening were not my concerns at the time. And it was a distance that was created immediately when, one, you walk into a room and you don't see anyone who looks like you. There's always that thought. And then on top of that, the conversations were really focused on things that just were not an issue for me at the time. And so I realized really quickly that there needed to be a space where I could talk about school choice in urban neighborhoods, or maternal mortality as a Black woman, or, that my concerns and my terror about police brutality. There's just like the list goes on and on and on. And I wanted there to be a place where the conversations about motherhood could include my issues. And I really heard from a lot of the people around me that they needed the same thing. And so it just kind of became like, hey, let's do something together.
So by the time her second daughter was born, Christina decided to start her own group called Growing Up Gorgeous, which started at her house and has now grown to an online community across the U.S. The next episode will go into greater detail about Growing Up Gorgeous, plus several other ideas for types of groups you can start yourself. Now that you've identified a few places to find friends and maybe a few people you want to become friends with, it's time to embrace that vulnerability and go for it. You might need to pump yourself up for this. Here's Julie Vick again.
Pushing yourself sometimes to go outside your comfort zone, even though you're tired or maybe not feeling like it, or you're not sure how a situation is going to be. I think you definitely do have to give yourself pep talk, because I think a lot of times I will be like, oh, I don't feel like going to this thing. And then I go, and then I'm like, oh, I'm really glad I went to this thing. I think it's easy for us to talk ourselves out of it. And especially if you're also shy or a little, especially anxious about things, I think it's easy to talk yourself out of it. So I think just making yourself do some things, it doesn't have to be everything, but choose a few things that are important to you. So it might not be like a party or something like that. It might be just reaching out to a parent and asking if you want to meet up for a smaller play date or something like that. So yeah, I think pushing yourself when you need to, but being aware of what's going to be too much for you as well.
And it's not just introverts that have to talk themselves in going places sometimes. Jenica Woodbury's on the other side of the spectrum.
Sometimes I don't want to go. I don't really love Bunko. I've been to big group dinners where it's somebody's birthday and they invite whoever, there's maybe 20 moms that come out to dinner, and then you just end up sitting by 2 people. I'm like, I don't know that that's for me, but I wouldn't know unless I just came. So you have to try. It's kind of it's like a workout for your body. It's a workout for your soul. If somebody's invited you to something, show up, even though it's hard. There's a lot of growth, and I am so surprised often. Even though I'm an extrovert, I have to drag myself out to the thing that a friend is putting together. Sometimes I just don't feel like it. And I would say 80% of the time I am so glad I went. And the 20% of the time just helps me understand, I don't think that's my people. And so then I just know, and I don't have to think about it anymore. Anytime I get an invite from that group, I can just know. I don't have to overthink it. There's no thank you. And you just move on.
So now that you've put yourself in proximity with other moms, let's talk about how to actually initiate a friendship, or at least a conversation. The first tip here is to just have confidence and assume that people are going to like you. I remember the first time I learned this concept from my mom. I was in 7th grade at a new middle school, and as you can imagine, struggling to make friends. She told me that when she walks into a room, she just assumes everyone will like her. I realized that I had been assuming the opposite, that people would think I was weird or dorky. Turns out this insecurity is very common, even when you've passed that middle school stage. Here's Christina.
We'll enter into new spaces and we'll say to ourselves, I don't belong here, right? Or I don't fit in. And it's really important to squash that voice in the back of our heads that speak those lies to us that you aren't welcome here, or you're different, or you're those sort of things.
Another false assumption that almost everybody I talked to brought up is that many of us assume that other people have all the friends they need and don't really have room for us.
We look at social media and we'll see what other people are doing with other people and compare and be like, well, she's making time for this person, she's making time for that person, she doesn't necessarily have time for me. And I think it's just as dangerous as looking at someone's relationship on social media. It kind of has a twinge of, just let me be real, it's jealousy that we feel. Yeah. And I think we have to ask ourselves, what is the track record of this person? How often have you reached out? Can you reach out more? And not put a judgment stamp on well, I've seen you on social and you don't want to be with me because you're being with all these other people. I think it's dangerous.
I've totally done this. When we started a new elementary school, they held what they call a kindergarten boohoo yahoo, where the parents get together after dropping their kids off. I walked in there and watched old friends greet each other, all excited to catch up, and I wondered why the heck I had even come. I had 2 little kids with me, and I felt totally lost. I think I just got the kids some juice and sat down for a minute, but we didn't stay long. I felt totally out of place and quite jealous of those other moms. But it was kindergarten. That means a lot of moms were also new to the school. Had I been looking for those people instead of being jealous of the ones who were reuniting, it would have been mutually beneficial and I might have made some friends. The truth is,
most people are open to making new friends and are interested in it. Most people assume other people already have all the friends they need. And so it is like kind of a mind game. There's a handful that feel like, and I had a friend say this to me one time. She's like, I don't really want to make any more friends. I already have enough friends. And I just thought, you know what, that is such a limiting belief, because there are so many cool and amazing people to meet. Like, why would you want to limit yourself that way? But in that stage of life that she was in, wasn't open to it. And there may be a few people in that stage, or maybe some people just aren't comfortable creating new groups. So you'll run into some of those people. But for the most part, most people want to make more friends and are open to it.
The 8th tip is both simple and difficult. It's to make sure you look like you're open to meeting people. I'm not saying that you have to look as eager as a Labrador retriever when you're at a party, but
your facial expressions make a big difference. But I notice I don't tend towards smiling. I just look serious all the time. And when you're not smiling, people make assumptions about you. So learning to smile, learning to look interested in people, like seem welcoming to people, those are skills you can actually work on, like smiling when somebody comes to the room, saying hi to people, not just putting your eyes down. Like some of those kinds of things can make a big difference. One article I was reading yesterday was talking a lot about smiling and positivity, that people really want to be friends with people who are positive and happy. That doesn't mean you don't have anything wrong with you ever, but people gravitate towards people who are happy and positive. So if they're going to choose to go talk to one person or a different person, I don't know about you, but I'm going to be drawn more towards the person that seems happy, unless it's a friend that's in need and sad and you want to go help them. But generally, people are drawn to people who are happy and excited to see them. And especially nowadays, when everyone has a phone, one of the things we tend to do when we're in a social situation and we're not sure what to do is people look down on their phone and they start scrolling. My mom is the most friendly person you could meet. She makes friends in grocery store lines, at doctor's offices. She still does, because she's not there sitting on her phone. But when you're trying to be open and receptive to friends, if you're on your phone, that automatically tells someone that you're busy. And that may not be what you may be nervous, but the impression you give is you're busy and you don't need anybody. And if you really do want friends, you're sending mixed signals to people.
The 9th tip is to stand in horseshoes. This is advice that I learned from Glennon Doyle in her book Untamed. She writes, if you're standing with other women in a circle and there's a woman standing alone in your circle's vicinity, the thing to do is notice her, smile at her, move over a bit, and say, hi, come join us. Even if she decides not to join your circle, even if she looks at you like you're crazy, inviting her is still the thing to do. Widen your circles all the time. Horseshoes are better than circles. Leave space. Always leave space. I love that quote so much. And I've really tried to remember this horseshoe principle ever since I read it. Elise referenced this technique in our conversation as well.
A lot of times when you're talking with your friends, even if you are open to making friends, you stand in a circle and you act like you're talking to each other. And people who don't have as many friends see that and they're like, well, there's not space for me in that group. I've been in that situation before, and you're just like, well, it's really scary to walk over to a closed group and try to, like, what do? Stand on the outside? Like, it's just awkward, right? So if alternatively we as women were to make space, then people who don't know us can come over, they can just listen. Someone can say, like, they'll notice you and include you. So I think we as women, sometimes even when we want to make new friends, we don't necessarily show that.
This is basically the other side of that kindergarten example I gave. Because now, when I go to school events, I'm one of the people greeting old friends and standing in the circle. It would be really easy for me to just talk to all the people I know. But how much better is it to remember what it felt like to be on the outside of that circle and be the one to welcome the parent who looks a little lost and out of her element? I have a friend named Reba Martin who is so good at this. If you happen to be passing by when she's in a conversation, she'll just stick her arm out and draw you in while continuing to either talk or listen, and then she'll introduce you around. She's one of those people who makes everyone feel like her best friend. Okay, so now you're in that circle, or you've decided to approach that mom pushing her kid on the swing. What now? Tip number 10 is to brush up on your conversation skills and maybe have a few conversation starters in your back pocket. In her book, Slay Like a Mother, Catherine Winch suggests that one of the best ways to connect with other moms is to drop the comparison game and have honest conversations. She suggests asking questions like, is your life as a working mom as chaotic as mine? Or, what's the hardest part of motherhood for you? Or, what's something you're doing to make your life easier lately?
It's like if you meet a new woman, a new mom, and you're intimidated and you think she's perfect and she has her house is always clean, her kids are obedient angels, we tend to turn other moms into like Uber moms when they're not. But I think it's like a conversation starter can be like, what are you struggling with? And it's just going to be a free for all, from there. But that's going to start a new relationship off on a great plane, a great level, because you're saying, I'm not perfect. What are you struggling with? I'll tell you what I'm struggling with. And that's, very eye opening.
Yeah, to heck with the weather. Who wants to talk about that?
Yeah.
A while ago, I tried to stop asking about what other women do for work and started asking what they like to do. I'll ask something like, so what do you like to do when you're not watching dance practice? Elise had some other great tips.
I think there are skills like just basic kind of conversation starters you can learn, or the kinds of open-ended questions you can ask people. Being a good listener is a really good skill to develop. I think a lot of people, when they're in groups, they're thinking of what they're going to say next instead of listening to who's talking. And I think if you can really work on slowing down and listening and not trying to come up with a response, maybe sometimes just validating people's experiences rather than sharing a Me Too experience. I mean, a lot of the way women interact is by sharing similar experiences. That's one of the ways we connect. But if you do it the wrong way, it can feel like you're just one-upping each other. I don't know, you've probably had those situations before where you're like, there's a whole difference between the connecting stories and the one-upping story. So I think trying to be aware of what things you're doing in a situation.
And if you need some more help, bring a prop. This is one of the hacks I got from Julie Vick.
It's funny, I have this t-shirt that's like a reference to the show Parks and Rec, and like about Lil Sebastian, if people know, but like I think you only know if you know the show, but like I've been wearing it, and then sometimes someone else is like, oh, I love that. So it's like a connection that you have.
That's a new thing to think about.
Yeah, I know, it's funny, I haven't thought about it. And then I have another shirt that has like the Norway flag on it. My grandpa was Norwegian, and like I've had conversations with people about that. So yeah, it's like if you went, I think that's another way in, right?
Another of Julie's favorite conversation props is a book. When she lived in New York, she used to always bring a book with her on the subway, which started many great conversations. Books are definitely one of my go-to props for parks or soccer games. Sometimes I actually get a minute to read them, but more often than not, I just end up chatting with people, and it's a great entry point for anyone who wants to strike up a conversation. It's also a great segue into finding out what kind of books they like and talking about more interesting things than the weather. One of my favorite props when I was in college was my tennis racket. I did not know this magic until I signed up for a tennis class, but when I started carrying around a tennis racket, suddenly there was something to talk about, especially for guys on campus. In fact, it worked so well that apparently it's how I met my husband. He claims that our first conversation in the biology class we had together was about the tennis racket I was carrying. I have no recollection of that conversation, but I believe him. A few years later, I was trying to teach my younger sister this trick as we were walking across campus. She had her racket in a bag, and I said, "Oh no, if you want to meet interesting guys, you have to carry it like this." I put it over my shoulder, and right at that moment, a guy rode by on a bike and said, "Hey, you play tennis?" Game, set, match. And of course, if there are kids around, you can use them as conversation starters too. Which one is yours? How old is yours? Or even better, that was a pro-parenting move over there. You'll have to teach me your ways. Our 11th tip is another quick tip from Julie Vick, and it might not be what you expect.
It's easier to get there early, and then people can approach you sometimes rather than like if you're the last one coming up late and there's already this group of people, which is funny because I feel like my instinct is to wait until the last minute.
Yeah, and like sneak in late so you're not as noticeable or something. Yeah.
Yeah, but like I feel like I got that tip from this book, Sorry I'm Late. I didn't want to come. And it's a book about where she's like an introvert, but she's trying to push herself. She said that for networking events, but I think it applies to also, when you're picking up your kids from school.
Maybe this last tip doesn't really fit because the ideal is to have social, in-person relationships. But there have been times, especially right after having babies and when the toddler nap time is so all-consuming, that I relied heavily on parasocial relationships. Parasocial relationships are one-sided relationships with people you don't know personally and that have no idea who you are. Sounds kind of depressing, but not necessarily. Podcasts were my social and intellectual lifeline when I was a young mom, fulfilling at least in part that need for adult conversation. They really did help me feel less lonely when my husband was so busy during his surgical residency. Sometimes it's a podcast that teaches you something or introduces interesting ideas or just entertains you. Some of my go-tos are Heavyweight, Revisionist History, or 99% Invisible. But sometimes you might want a more conversational one where 2 or more people are just chatting. One of my go-to podcasts for this is Family Looking Up, and happily, the hosts of that show have also become in-person friends. I hope that at least a few of you that I haven't met yet consider me a friend. If that's the case, I also hope we can meet for real sometime. So let's be friends, and let's keep this conversation about friendship going on Instagram and over the next 2 episodes. If you have anything to share about cultivating friendship or how you spend time with friends, let me know. There's still time to add to those episodes. Between now and then, go out and make some friends. Thank you so much for listening to the How She Moms podcast and for being part of this community. There are so many other ways for you to connect and hopefully also contribute. I share tips and ideas regularly on Instagram and Facebook at How She Moms. You can find past episodes and other resources at howshemoms.com. And you can always just email me directly at whitney@howshemoms.com. Special thanks to my own wonderful mom, Susan Singley, for recording my theme music. She played this song all the time when I was growing up, and to me, it's the soundtrack of motherhood.